As we discussed in our last lesson, we are focusing content here on helping people understand how food, and in particular the nutrients within the food, go on to support the human body. But what are nutrients and where do they come from? When we think about food and what we should eat, often the first thing that comes to mind for people are the different food groups. They'll talk about fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy. All of those groups are well and good, and they definitely have their purpose. But what about the foods that don't neatly fit within these categories? Does that mean that they're not providing our body with anything? And how do we navigate if we can't or don't eat one of those particular food groups? Are we doomed? And what about the recipes and dishes that contain multiple categories? How do we make sure that we're getting what we need, and how do we make sense of it all? So that's why in our nutrition lessons, we are going to talk about the food groups, but we're going to focus on the nutrients within the food. Because at the end of the day, our body doesn't really care about dairy. For example, there's plenty of wonderful things in dairy products, but it's the nutrients within dairy products that our body really needs and is looking for. And we can get those nutrients by having dairy, but we also have the option to get those nutrients from different sources. Nutrition is the study of how different nutrients affect the body. And there are 6 different classifications of essential nutrients, and they're placed into 3 different buckets that we're going to cover throughout the course of these lessons. The first bucket are macronutrients, then we have micronutrients, and then we have water or fluid. So the first major category that we're going to talk about are macronutrients. These are the nutrients that our body needs in the largest amounts. That's why they get the word macro. They provide our body with different types of energy, direct energy, and ultimately they also help our body create different structures. These different macronutrients include things like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, within each of these categories of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, there are further subcategories and sometimes even further subcategories. So for example, when we look at the family of carbohydrates, that's kind of the overarching category. It's all of the things made with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Those are the 3 elements located within that particular nutrient. But within that family, you can have things like starch, sugar, and fiber. All of those nutrients are made with the same chemical structure, but what really makes a difference is the length of the bond and the complexity of the bond. But even there are different types of starch, there are different types of sugar, and there are different types of fiber. And we're going to learn more about all of these things later. So our body ultimately takes these nutrients and breaks it into smaller pieces for use. So for example, the carbohydrates that include things like starch and sugar, our body will turn into blood glucose. So it turns all starch and all sugar into the exact same end product, no matter where it came from. It will turn protein into amino acids, and it'll turn fat into lipids. The estimated energy that our body is able to get from a given nutrient is measured or estimated by something called calories. That's just how we refer to the energy we're estimated to get from a particular nutrient. Our body basically recognizes 3 forms of energy. As we mentioned, the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those are all recognized as different types of energy. Side note, our body also recognizes and metabolizes alcohol as its own energy source. However, it is not an essential nutrient, so it's not something that we will cover here. Now, calories are not bad. They are not something to be avoided. Each of the 3 essential nutrients or essential energies not only provide energy, but they also have distinct functions within the body that we're going to learn more throughout the upcoming lessons. Every single food that we eat is made up of some combination of different chemistries, and that ultimately creates the food's mass, and that's where we get the nutrients from. There are very, very few foods that are only one nutrient. Everything is basically combinations. These chemistries or nutrients are ultimately what the body sees and are able to convert to usable tools within the body. The next category of nutrients that we're going to talk about are micronutrients. They're called micro because they're needed in smaller amounts. They do not directly give our body any energy, but all of the different metabolic pathways and different systems of the body use these micronutrients to make different mechanisms happen. Within the family of micronutrients, you have 16 vitamins and 13 minerals. And we're going to learn more about these a little bit later in the course. Water is another category of nutrient. While it does not provide any direct energy, it's involved in almost every structure and every process of the body. Almost every single part of us has fluid or water to some degree, which is why it is so essential for life. And we're definitely going to explore it in greater detail a little bit later on in the course. So, how do we know if we're getting enough of all of these different nutrients? That's one reason people tend to use the food groups to try to understand and apply nutrient balance. It's not because there's something magical about the groups in particular, but it's simply one way that we can work to balance chemistries within the foods, while also considering what's available and what our body needs. But it's really, really crucial to understand that we are not doomed if the balance is off for a period of time. We are not that fragile. And really, the balance that's right for one person may be different than what's right for another. So it's very difficult to be prescriptive with food groups or even applying different food groups because we all have such very individual needs. And it's really important to work with our body and learn to listen to what our body may be trying to communicate. And that's also why it's valuable to understand nutrition beyond food groups and kind of dig into the chemistry, not in an effort to overly control. So it's not recommended to go out there and try to count all of this. You don't need to monitor every single nutrient, but rather if we can understand the nutrients or the purpose and why we're eating, we can actually be more flexible in how we're approaching food. Because at the end of the day, our body cares about getting the end products that it needs for daily functions. It cares that it's getting blood glucose. It cares that it's getting amino acids. It cares that it's getting lipids. It doesn't care what food provided those tools. So we have the flexibility to put different foods together to create the tools that we need and the nutrients that we need. We can eat foods in different combinations to help our body get to the same end result. So for example, it's going to be controversial, but hear me out. Our body doesn't care whether or not it got blood glucose from an apple or a cookie. Now, I'm not saying an apple and a cookie are the exact same thing from a biological sense. They both provide different sets of nutrients. But if we consider that what our body cares most about is that it gets the nutrients that it needs, we can put different foods together with an apple or with a cookie to ultimately create the same energy profile. So for example, an apple is going to contain water, fiber, vitamins, and minerals, along with some sugar. Whereas a cookie is going to have sugar, starch, fat, some vitamins, and minerals. Neither one of these things contain protein. If you ate an apple, you're not getting fat, so you would want to add fat somewhere else. If you had a cookie, you're probably not going to get antioxidants, so we're trying to get that from a different source. So it's not that one is better, one is worse. They're different, and at the end of the day, we're trying to create the same, not ideal, not the same, but really trying to create and get our body to where it needs with the nutrients that it benefits from. And it's important to note that there's no such thing as empty calories. By definition, calories are energy. And as we just learned, every single energy or macronutrient is considered a nutrient. It has a distinct and important function within the body. So if there's energy in the food, our body will put it to use. Not all foods contain the same combinations of nutrients, and that is what we're trying to be a little bit thoughtful of, but we don't have to be perfect. And there is no food that provides everything that our body needs, but it's about us getting creative to put together different combinations of chemistries to ultimately meet our needs. And it's these chemistries that we're going to explore in more detail in the upcoming lessons, as well as how do we find that sweet spot of healthy, sustainable eating. And that's the place where we can give our body the nutrients that it needs while also considering what's available and what we enjoy, and what we prefer. It is possible to find that combination. So next up, we're going to explore more about the concept of calories and how we know whether or not we're giving our body the energy or the nutrients that we need. See you there.